Okay, so tell me this. If I ask you what is the right amount of calories that you should be having every day?
How many calories are in guacamole?
Tell me what comes up in your head. Just notice it. I can bet that it's a specific number, and likely that number has been impacted by all the things that you've been told about how many calories you should be eating. And I can bet that some of that has been guided by the nutrition labels. And so if you're feeling confused about how many calories you should be having every day and just confused about the conversation around calories, that's what we're going to be getting into and diving into today. But trigger warning, if you are wanting to move away from calories, if hearing numbers is hard for you right now, this might not be the best video for you to watch. You definitely want to take a listen to this. But before we dive into things, I want to introduce myself. My name is Catherine Metzeler. I'm a registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, here to help you create peace with food and your body so that all of it takes up less headspace and you can reclaim the life that it has stolen from you. If you're new here, click like and click subscribe. If you're not new here, welcome back, and let's dive into things. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that even if you haven't tracked your calories or followed a certain diet, that you are aware of calorie amounts. And I can imagine that you have a number in your head or a range in which you feel like you're supposed to stick within. This is especially so if you have followed certain diets, if you have joined certain apps like if you've read magazines, if you've existed in this culture, you likely have felt like you needed to follow a certain calorie amount. And a common calorie amount is that 2,000 amount that you see on the back of nutrition labels. And this is something that comes up all the time with my clients when I ask them, when I'm in one-on-one sessions, I'm wondering what a calorie amount that comes to your mind when you think about what you should be eating. Oftentimes for people, it's that 2,000 amount, but for some people, it's much lower than that. Some of my clients will say 1,400 or 1,500 or something that comes from someone else telling them how many calories they should and shouldn't be eating. Here's something that's really important when we're having this conversation, that your body's needs vary every single day. I, even as a dietitian, can't predict the exact amount of calories that you need on a daily basis. What I can say though is that 1,400, 1,800, 1,500, they are all very low caloric amounts that are appropriate for young children that are toddlers. That is what children eat. That is the amount generally of calories that they need to take in. And so if you can think about how many calories an adult might need, it is much more than that. If 2,000 calories comes up in your mind and you feel fixated on that, the question then becomes, where does that come from? Why do so many people, including maybe yourself, think of 2,000 calories as being this right amount? Let's talk about the origin story of that and why you might be a little disappointed. So here's a brief history. In 1990, the Food and Nutrition Labeling Act was passed. And this essentially was a bill that put forth that everyone had to standardize their labeling because historically, before that, the labeling that reflected the percentages of different kinds of things that were in the food really varied depending on the manufacturer. So they wanted to standardize the labeling in 1990 and it was passed. As part of this labeling act, the FDA wanted to be sure that everyone could compare nutrient percentages in each product to make sure that they were getting enough of different kinds of nutrients. This is where it gets a little tricky. So the FDA realized that you can't compare nutrient percentages because nutrient percentages would change based on need depending on how many calories someone would need in a day. They needed to figure out what amount to put in order to standardize the caloric amount, even though everyone's needs really vary. So how did they come up with this standard amount? They used something called food consumption surveys, which are self-reported studies that look at people and ask people to answer certain questions. In this case, it was about their consumption of food to get a sense of the average amount that men and women eat in a day. The interesting thing about these studies and any self-reported study that we know is that people typically underreport the amount of food that they're eating. Women, for example, reported eating from 1,600 to 2,200 calories a day, and men reported eating from 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day. So from this data that they gathered, they took the average of that, which is about 2,350 calories at the time, and said that this should be the standard based on self-reported data from those studies, which was an amount that was still below the average requirement for adults at the time and still is today. And despite this number not even being enough to meet many adults' caloric needs, there was a group of dietitians at the time that legislated and advocated for lowering that amount because they believed that people would overconsume if they left it at that caloric amount. So the FDA decided to lower that amount to make it an even number despite it decreasing significantly, and to put that onto food labels. The FDA at the time said that this was a reasonable number to round down to, and a round number so people would be able to understand it better. But a 20% reduction in overall recommendation for a caloric amount doesn't sound like a reasonable reduction at all. And it largely sounds like the dietitians that were advocating for having a lower amount, which is very disappointing as a dietitian, but is not surprising to me. The ones that were advocating for a lower caloric amount had their own weight biases and also likely had their own disordered relationship with food, considering that they believed that people would overconsume and generally that people couldn't be trusted with their own hunger and their ability to be able to feed and nourish themselves. So while I hope that that information helps you to really challenge any beliefs about the right amount of calories that you're supposed to have and really challenge what shows up on food labels, because it really, honestly, when we boil it down, is just an arbitrary amount based in self-reported studies as a way to standardize food recommendations, specifically nutrient recommendations, across all labels. It does not mean that that's the amount that you're supposed to have. And for the majority of adults, it's actually not enough to meet their needs. And I'm aware that just with that information, it's really difficult to challenge your relationship with calories because we are taught to believe the standard equation of calories in, calories out that doesn't actually apply in many ways to people and bodies. And there's a ton of weight stigma and anti-fatness out there that makes us believe that calories from food are something that's bad for us and we should be working towards reducing it, and we should avoid calories at all costs and try to trick our body into having less calories, when in fact there's a way that you can completely reframe and change your relationship with calories. And here's something that I want you to take away from this as a way to change your relationship with calories. Calories are simply a measurement of energy, and your body needs energy. Your body needs energy from food. And so the more that you can see the calories that you're consuming as something positive, you are giving your body all the nutrients that it needs by making sure that you are getting enough energy in the day from the food that you are eating. And instead of restricting calories, I want you to think about leaning into and making sure you're getting enough. And knowing what enough is also another tricky part, because if you use apps like, or gosh, there's so many other ones out there, it's going to largely underestimate the amount of calories that you need in a day. So those apps cannot be trusted. I would highly recommend not going on any platform or doing a Google search or any of it, because it is going to underestimate the amount that you need. So where does this then leave you with not knowing how much you need in a day? The amount of calories that you need each day is actually going to vary every day. And even as a dietitian, it's hard for me to predict the amount that you are going to need. It varies based on sleep, energy levels, amount of food that you had the next day, sickness, and other things that contribute to our hunger levels really varying. So this is why I really want to encourage you to not follow calorie amounts. It tends not to be helpful for the majority of people. It leads to using external rules as a way to guide your food choices and completely disconnects you from your actual food needs. You will be likely really hungry certain days and less hungry other days. You will need more food on some days and less food on other days. And no caloric amount is going to account for that fluctuation in how hungry or not hungry you are. And following calorie amounts just leaves you more confused, more frustrated, more restricted. And so I want to encourage you to really try to connect with your body as a way to guide this process. You can use your plate, and this is something that I most certainly do with my clients early on in the stages of their own healing and recovery. But over time, and I don't know where you are in your relationship with food, but over time we want to be practicing giving ourselves permission to have enough food in whatever that amount is for that meal. And look, I know that that can feel really scary, and it's easier said than done for me to say, make sure you're having the amount that you need and want in a meal. Sometimes this is going to be uncomfortable for you. Sometimes you're going to need to eat more food than you may have allowed yourself to have historically. But over time, with practice and consistency, this gets easier, and you stop thinking about calories, you start letting numbers go and leaning into trusting your body that it wants good things for you. It has got your best interests at heart. It is trying to make sure that you survive and stay alive, and that calories are a unit of energy. They are energy that you are giving to your body as an act of care and love, and as a way to say thanks for carrying me around in life. If you like this video, make sure you comment below, like it, share it with other people, and let's keep having conversations about calories, because goodness do we exist in a world that makes feeding and nourishing ourselves so confusing, and calories tend not to help with that. I'll see you next week.